What's going on, guys? This is James Allen, and I'm hoping you like the new format. I'm not on the streets, it's less fancy, but I also feel that this format is more grounded and also more intimate. I'm home, less editing, it's just me and you talking. So, what I want to talk about is actually something I've been studying for the last 10 years, and that is community. I've traveled throughout the world, and I've studied and observed community, and reflected on what I've seen, and I have noticed certain elements that every community possess. So I thought, the time we're going to in the near future, I think, is going to be a time where people go back to community and either creating new communities or organizing the communities that already exist out there. So I'm hoping this video will be useful to my community organizers out there, or just someone who's just interested in society in general. I think this is good intellectual stimulation as well. Anyway, there are 10 elements that I have noticed every community possess. Now, I did not sit down and say, oh, I'm going to create a list of 10 elements. I sort of wrote them down first, and after finished writing them down, I noticed that there were 10, so it was kind of nice. But these 10 elements is more or less pervasive. So here they are. The first one is ritual. Every community has its ritual. Let me give you an example. If you're a skater, your ritual is you skate. So skaters get together and they skate. That's their ritual. If you're a programmer, if you're in a tech community, the ritual is you code. You write code. If you're a surfer, you go surfing. If you're a volleyball player, your ritual is you play volleyball. The point is this. Every community, the starting point, the base layer is always a ritual. People performing a ritual together. That's the first element I have noticed every community possess. Now, the second element is contribution. The reason why contribution is important is because not everyone in a community knows how to perform that ritual. What do I mean by that? Let's just say we're surfers. In a surfer community, not everyone surf. Some people just like to watch surfers surf. So if you cannot perform the ritual, you could still be part of a community by contributing, going to their event, giving that community money, doing auxiliary work for them, or just being a fan, So I feel like there's many ways you could contribute in the community. And if you don't know that ritual, contributing in any way lets you in that community. I tell people that all the time. If the quickest way to join a community is by contributing to it. So super important stuff here. The third element is familiarity. And what I mean by that is that a community has familiar faces. It builds familiar faces over time. Let me give you an example. Let's just say I live in a particular area, or I belong to a digital community. As I start seeing the same faces over and over and over again, that familiarity in of itself breeds a sense of community. Like, oh, I've seen this kid before. He's a local here, or let's say you belong in a digital community and you're both coding, or a group of people is coding remotely. Just the fact that you are meeting, and having video meetings with this person over and over starts to build a sense of community, because that familiarity sort of breeds a sense of like togetherness. And what that familiarity does as well is a little bit deeper. What it does is it builds a reputation system. Because if you meet this person and nothing happens the first time, you meet this person again, nothing crazy happened the second time, you meet this person again, nothing crazy happens the third time. So you start to say, okay, this person's normal. He's not crazy. He's sane. I could tolerate him. So therefore, you have a higher level of trust for someone you are more familiar with, and nothing crazy happened, and someone you just meet from scratch, and you don't know what could happen the second time you meet this person, right? So, familiarity is super important, because covertly it builds a reputation system, whether you realize it or not, and that's a big part of community, believe it or not, reputation. Anyway, the fourth element of a community is a temple. Every community has its temple. Now, a temple is where members get together and either hang out or perform their ritual. For an example, in tech, there's this thing called hackathon, where a bunch of programmers get together and perform their ritual. They write code, but they perform their ritual together in a building, and they go at it for a long period of time. And these buildings where these hackathons are performed can be seen as a ritual as a temple of the tech community. But a temple doesn't necessarily need to be a place where a ritual is performed. You could have a place where the members just hang out. For an example, I was in LA not too long ago, and I was hanging out at a place called Rose Cafe. And, it turns out that Rose Cafe is a place where a lot of writers come and write. So it's a temple for writers where they perform their ritual, which is writing, right? So every community has its known temples. And in the app, the Cityscape app, we call these temples secret spots. If you're not too familiar with Cityscape, I'm going to leave a link in the description for you to find out more about it. But, temples is an integral part of a community because that's where members can get together and build that intimacy or perform their ritual together or do both, Now, as we move forward from there, we're going to start getting a little bit more abstract. The fifth element is shared language. Every community has its jargon, so to say. And a big part of, sort of that community recognizing you as a member is you speaking their language. If you don't know their terms, they sort of still see you as an outsider. Let me give you a quick example. I happen to speak French, for an example. If I meet someone who's also French speaking and we stop speaking English and we start speaking French, the minute we do that, there's a deeper connection that happens there because there's a common bond. And, we sort of like, we're insiders of a, community that not everyone could do, right? So, it's kind of hard to explain, but the minute you speak the common language with someone, you connect with them at a heart-to-heart level that I cannot explain. In every community, it might not necessarily be like a language like French or German. It could be like a technical jargon. If you know the technical terms of the programming language, for an example, other programmers will take you more seriously rather than someone who knows nothing about that language. So jargon is a very big part of community. Know its language. Up next is shared history. Now, if language gives you that immediate connection, shared history is slower, but it gives you a deeper connection. Every community has like a shared ancestry, like a common ancestor, common myth, common stories. And learning those stories about that community, learning the ancestry, learning the history of a community will really make you get accepted. That's how you really become accepted in a community. If the language gives you that quick bond, the history is how a community truly embraces you. You've proven yourself to that community, that you're invested, you've invested in that community. So every community has its shared history, and if you really want to go deep and be deeply accepted by that community, learn it. After shared history, another thing that's also super important is, shared leaders. Communities have like known leaders. In tech, for an example, everyone knows who Elon Musk is. But in a different community, let's just say if I go to like the military, for example, if I go to the army and I start talking about Elon Musk, a lot of people don't know who Elon Musk is, right? When in tech, everyone sort of know who he is. So not only every community has its known leaders, but one thing you also realize is that leaders are community dependent. There's no such thing as a leader for everyone. The leaders have their known locality, and that locality is more or less a community. We're going to get into each of these elements one by one in future videos, so we don't need to dive deep in them right now. Now, the eighth element is a bit controversial, but I think a lot of you watching this will agree. Every community has a hierarchy. Now, I know in today's age, hierarchy is sort of looked at negatively, but it's not a negative thing. Hierarchy is not bad, because without hierarchy, there is no progress. There's no ladder for people to climb. If everyone is equal off the bat, there is no ladder for people to rise up to, and this makes life sort of stagnant. Now, by hierarchy, I don't necessarily mean like you're looked down upon. By hierarchy, I mean levels. There are levels of knowledge, levels of connection, and you could see the leaders, which we talked about as the seventh point. The leaders are at the top of the hierarchy because they're the best at that community's ritual. They have the best knowledge. They know the most people in that community. So there are many different elements that make someone rise within that community. How many people you know, how good you are at performing that ritual, how well do you know the community's history, right? The leaders are sort of the top, the creme de la creme at that hierarchy. But the new entrants, they need to know, what does the community value so that I could become a leader, right? So that's why hierarchy is important, because it gives the new entrants of that community something to aspire to, you know, and the leaders are the guideposts, but that ladder on how they reach that level needs to be made clear. So again, we're going to get into these points at separate videos, so we don't need to go deep right now. Now the last two is the most abstract in my opinion, but they're also the most fun. The ninth element that I've noticed every community need is a symbol. Every community needs a symbol, and that symbol is sort of like the synthesis of the subconscious expression of that community. Now you could see a country as a macro community. Everyone that belongs to that country belongs in that community, and that symbol is synthesized by their flag. But there are many smaller communities within a country, and I would even argue that a community nowadays is not really a country, especially a country like America, where it's not unified. A country can hardly be considered a real community. You know, real communities have all these elements I've mentioned, and a country doesn't. Let's look at the Navy for an example. The Navy has certain symbols which every member knows and understands. If you need an explanation of the symbol, then you're really not part of that community. And every community has their own symbols like that. I kid you not. Whether it's hip hop, whether it's volleyball, you know, whether it's skaters, 420, they have their symbols. And if you know that symbol, then you're an insider. If you don't know that symbol, you're not an insider. You're not part of the community. And that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of people walk with shirts with symbols on them that means nothing to you. But someone else who's part of that community will know, right? But again, we're going to get into these things much deeper in later episodes. The last one is personally my favorite. The last one is archetype. Every community has its known archetype, a collective ideal, something, a persona that every man or woman needs to aspire to become. And quick clue, this archetype is one of the main reasons why certain communities don't see eye to eye with each other, because their archetypes are so different, are so polar opposite, that these communities are sort of like on the opposite end of the spectrum. We're not going to go too deep. I'm going to cut it short for this video, you know, but these are the 10 elements that make up a community, and you ought to learn them if your goal is to organize a community or create one from scratch. Well, that's it for this video, guys. I'll see you next time. And of course, don't forget to check out the Cityscape app if you're interested in finding secret spots for a community or creating a world for a community you want to start. That's it for this video, guys. I'll see you next time.